Mrs. Evelyn Johnson watched in shock as Officer Richard Barrett ripped the American flag from her son's casket. The funeral, which was being live streamed, instantly became a national crisis. Staff Sergeant James Johnson was a decorated hero who sacrificed his life to save his unit of 12 soldiers in Afghanistan. He grew up in Mapleton, Georgia, a small town with deep racial divisions, but always saw the military as a way to serve the country he loved. His mother, Evelyn, had raised him and his two siblings alone after her husband died in the First Gulf War. James was planning to retire soon to help care for his mother. Meanwhile, Lieutenant Richard Barrett, a local police officer with a history of racial profiling, watched the news coverage of James's return with disgust. He had his own personal history with the military, having been rejected from service. He told his fellow officers that he would be handling security for the funeral, even though others had already been assigned, determined to show everyone who was really in charge. James's sister, Maya, a civil rights attorney, flew home from Atlanta to support her mother. She immediately recognized Barrett and remembered a past encounter where he had harassed her brother as a teenager, a moment that had solidified James's decision to join the Army. The day before the funeral, Barrett began his campaign of disruption, authorizing road closures under false pretenses and reassigning the officers meant to assist with the procession. On the day of the funeral, the military honor guard arrived to prepare for the procession. Their commander, Captain Luis Mendez, was immediately pulled over by Lieutenant Barrett for a non-existent traffic violation. Barrett threatened Mendez with arrest and became aggressive, saying, "In Mapleton, you follow our rules or face consequences." Captain Mendez reported the alarming incident to his superiors at the Pentagon, marking the first of many such reports. Mia, noticing Barrett's cruiser parked near their home, warned her mother that the officer had a history of racism and seemed intent on causing trouble. Evelyn, however, was too overwhelmed by grief to engage in another battle. She simply said she couldn't fight that battle right now and trusted that no one would dare to disrupt a military funeral. Unbeknownst to her, Barrett was doing exactly that. He had already reassigned the 4 officers officially detailed to the event and created a fake water main break to block the planned funeral route. He even called the cemetery caretaker to demand last-minute changes to the burial arrangements. As the Johnson family and military officials worked to honor James's sacrifice, Barrett's prejudice was setting the stage for a confrontation that would soon capture the nation's attention. The morning of the funeral, crowds gathered and national news vans lined the street outside historic Hope Baptist Church. At the police station, Lieutenant Barrett prepared for the day, adding several non-regulation accessories to his uniform to appear more authoritative. He positioned police cars to reroute the funeral procession away from the planned route, claiming security concerns. This forced the military transport to stop, delaying the entire ceremony. When the service finally began, Barrett entered the back of the church. Unlike the other officers who stood respectfully, he walked partway down the aisle and stood, his posture suggesting surveillance. When the honor guard commander quietly asked him to take a seat, Barrett loudly responded that he was securing the location under a county ordinance, absurdly classifying the funeral as a military operation. Maya, the civil rights attorney, immediately began texting her contacts, while the military officials present also alerted their superiors. As the service concluded, Barrett followed the procession out, setting the stage for the full confrontation to come. At the cemetery, Barrett arrived early and parked his cruiser to block the path to the gravesite. He confronted the cemetery director, a Vietnam veteran, and threatened to arrest him for obstructing a police officer when the director protested his presence. As the funeral procession arrived, Evelyn, Maya, and their family were faced with a surreal scene. Police tape surrounded the cemetery entrance. Barrett announced that the procession must halt until he completed a security assessment. Captain Mendez stepped forward, presenting federal documentation to confirm their authority to conduct the funeral. Barrett countered with his own printed out county ordinance, claiming local law enforcement had precedence. Maya, recording the entire interaction on her phone, identified herself as an attorney, prompting Barrett to order her to stop recording. When she refused, Barrett escalated his threats, announcing that if they continued to interfere, he would place you all under arrest and impound the remains. The mourners gasped in shock, their grief now mixed with outrage. At that moment, Evelyn Johnson stepped forward. Her small frame commanded the space as she faced Barrett, her voice steady despite her tears. "That is my son. He died protecting people he'd never even met. How dare you stand between a mother and her child's final rest?" Barrett, undeterred, responded with a callous, racially charged statement that James should have followed proper channels. A murmur of outrage ran through the crowd as several military veterans in attendance moved forward, creating a human shield around the casket. Barrett, growing more aggressive, requested additional units on his radio and began to threaten arrest. Overwhelmed, Evelyn clutched her chest and collapsed into Maya's arms, a moment captured by dozens of cameras. As paramedics rushed to her side, Barrett reached for the American flag draped over the casket, claiming it violated a local ordinance. A young honor guard member instinctively moved to protect it, resulting in a brief physical struggle that was broadcast live to over 1 million viewers. National news networks interrupted their programming to show the shocking confrontation as outrage erupted across the country. The confrontation, now being broadcast on national television, quickly reached the highest levels of government. The Secretary of Defense was briefed, and within minutes, the White House was notified, interrupting a presidential meeting. The president recognized James Johnson's name. 3 years prior, he had personally thanked James for his courage during a security incident. The president immediately ordered his staff to get him on a secure line and to get information on the police officer. Meanwhile, Lieutenant Barrett, a local police officer with a history of racial profiling, still belligerent, began yelling that he would read the riot act to the assembled mourners. At that moment, his phone rang. He answered, and to his shock, the voice on the other end introduced himself as the President of the United States. The president calmly but firmly told Barrett that his actions were morally reprehensible and legally indefensible. He then revealed his personal connection to James and stated that he had just signed an executive order to clarify federal jurisdiction. As state police arrived to take over, the president delivered his final order. "I expect you to stand down immediately. I then want you to apologize to Mrs. Johnson and her family." He then told Barrett to hand the phone to Evelyn. Barrett, visibly shaken, handed the phone to Evelyn, who spoke with the president for a few minutes. Meanwhile, a state police captain arrived and immediately relieved Barrett of duty, ordering him to surrender his weapon. When Barrett began to protest, he was forcibly disarmed and handcuffed and arrested. His career ended with each step he took away from the gravesite. On the phone, the president told Evelyn that he would stay on the line and listen to the ceremony, wanting to bear witness to her son's final honors. With Barrett removed, the military honor guard resumed the funeral with flawless precision. The dignity of the ceremony, so cruelly interrupted, was restored. At the local police station, investigators immediately began reviewing Barrett's personnel file, which revealed a shocking pattern of misconduct over his 20-year career, with dozens of complaints of excessive force and racism that had been systematically dismissed. The Justice Department and the Pentagon also announced full-scale investigations, making it clear that Barrett's actions were not only a personal failing, but a public exposure of systemic issues. In the months that followed, Richard Barrett was charged with multiple crimes, including civil rights violations and interfering with the federal ceremony. He was denied bail and appeared in court in an orange jumpsuit, a stark contrast to his once proud uniform. Evelyn Johnson emerged as an unexpected voice of moral clarity, giving interviews that emphasized the need for justice over anger. 1 year after the funeral, Richard Barrett was convicted and sentenced to 5 years in federal prison. The judge stated that his actions were a fundamental betrayal of the principles that Staff Sergeant Johnson died defending. The Mapleton Police Department underwent a complete restructuring